Greetings, Den of Geek fans, and welcome to the Paranormal Pop Culture Hour, although it's a half-hour Paranormal Pop Culture Hour today. I am your host, Aaron Sagers. I'm a Den of Geek contributor, as well as a paranormal journalist, a researcher of all things weird, and you can also catch me on Paranormal Caught on Camera now in its fourth season. So I don't want to waste too much time. I want to get right to it and talk about some of these Bigfoot discoveries with our guest. So diving in, if you guys don't know, Expedition Bigfoot, it is a really fun show. It's currently airing its second season on Discovery Plus. And this is crazy. I got a press release recently touting mysterious evidence of, quote, a non-human primate presence in the Appalachians. I mean, that's a big claim. That's pretty huge, big. And we want to find out what the story is about that. Now, look, the season 2 finale of Expedition Bigfoot is going to get into this, and that drops on March 28th on Discovery Plus. But before, you don't have to wait. We're going to start talking about this now because this is based on eDNA evidence collected by researcher Ronnie LeBlanc and our guest today, Dr. Mireya Mehra. And let me tell you a little bit about her before we bring her in. Dr. Mehra is a world-renowned primatologist. She's a Fulbright scholar, a National Science Foundation fellow, and I think it's safe to say she's not your typical scientist because for nearly 2 decades, she has been a wildlife correspondent reporting on wildlife and habitat loss while advocating for solutions to these alarming trends. And she's been called a female Indiana Jones. And as a fan of Indiana Jones, and I'm drinking out of a Marshall College mug right now, that excites me to have her on here today. She's been in the media. She's been an inspiration to young women interested in science and exploration. She's a 2-time Emmy Award-nominated field correspondent for the National Geographic Channel, and she reports to audiences worldwide. And not only that, she co-discovered one of the world's smallest primates. This is a brand new species to science, and she also has a great backstory. She's a daughter of Cuban immigrants. Grew up in Miami, earned her bachelor's degree in anthropology and English at the University of Miami, went on to earn her PhD from Stony Brook University, recently joined Florida International University as director of the Exploration and Science Communication Initiative, and is also the author of Pink Boots and a Machete, My Journey from NFL Cheerleader to National Geographic Explorer. And without further ado, let me bring her in. Dr. Mireya Mehra, thank you so much for joining us. Hey.
Thank you. That was quite the introduction.
Well, hey, you've done quite a lot, so it's a lot to get through, and we have a lot to get through today. First off, I know you're born of Cuban immigrants, but you spent a lot of time in Florida, and even though I'm based in New York City, I'm a Florida boy, so
Great.
I love talking to fellow Floridians from this weird state that we come from. Well, okay, it's to just sort of lay the groundwork before we get into this eDNA evidence. You have a quote out there. You've been quoted as saying you approached the investigation into Bigfoot as a scientist and an anthropologist, not as a Bigfoot enthusiast. And I want you to expand on that a little bit. What does that mean?
So I think that what I really wanted out of this is for this to be taken very seriously. I wanted it to be very grounded in science, and I wanted to conduct the expedition in the way that I would any other expedition when I'm out in South America or Africa or Madagascar, using scientific methodology that's been proven in tracking rare and elusive primates. So I just wanted to give this a very serious approach because normally when you say Bigfoot, it's something that will elicit giggles and it's not been taken seriously or embraced by the scientific community. And I knew that if I was going to go out there, that I wanted it to be treated seriously, and I wanted us to really do it with a scientific integrity.
Okay, but why is Bigfoot worth researching? I mean, I'm a fan, but you know, but why?
So, first of all, I got into science because of my curiosity, and because science is really all about answering questions that remain unanswered. And I don't think that there's a more monumental question than Bigfoot, the legend of Bigfoot. And I thought maybe this was the opportunity to take it out of the legend books and into science books. So when people ask me, well, why did you decide to join this expedition? It's because I love exploration, and I believe that there's lots of things out there that we don't know exist. And in fact, we see that all the time with discoveries of primates and other mammals. It's not an uncommon thing to discover all this stuff. And I've done it myself. I was with a colleague in Madagascar not that many years ago when we discovered the world's smallest primate. So I know that it's easy to think that we have all the answers because anything that we want to know, we Google it and pops up, there it is. But when it comes to nature and the animals that are out there, we don't have all the answers. And so that's why Bigfoot.
Right. And I think that, yeah, we get so caught up in this idea of, look, I am a big proponent of science. Obviously, it's insane not to be, but we get so caught up in the idea of science has explained everything, discovered everything, but that's simply not true. There's still a lot of world out there. There's still a large galaxy and deep oceans with a lot of mysteries. And science is about asking questions and taking risks, right?
Well, most definitely. And there have been quite a number of occasions when we've been out in the field where things have happened that I am a witness to that science can't explain. And so while perhaps people perceive me as a skeptic, as a scientist, I would consider myself a very open-minded skeptic, because I don't think that you should just dismiss the stuff that we can't explain with science, because it helps, I believe, in this case, to understand the puzzle we're trying to put together. These are all pieces of it, or seemingly so. So I'm very open-minded about this stuff. And yeah, there has been a lot that's happened out there that has really made me, scratch my head and say, what's going on here? And trying to come up with some kind of plausible explanation that, quite frankly, isn't apparent. Science can't simply explain it away.
Right. And I mean, you're in good company, because Jane Goodall is also was in the camp of saying, look, there's a mystery out there. It's not, skepticism is a good thing. Cynicism is not so much a good thing.
I completely agree. I think that you have to have a healthy amount of skepticism without becoming cynical. And it's funny you would mention Jane Goodall, because, I've obviously, like every other girl around, been a fangirl, and she wrote the foreword for my book. And it's like I'm very close to her. And someone asked her if she believed in Bigfoot, and what she said really was something close to my heart, because I feel the same, which is, she said, I think it's possible, and I really hope so, because she's a romantic at heart, and she loves the idea that there is this amazing creature out there that we haven't really been able to, at least scientifically, prove yet, right? And I can sympathize with that, because I'm a bit of a romantic myself, and I know that there's still so much that we have to learn about what's out there. And so, sure, I totally think that it's possible.
And well, I do want to point out that just before we go any further, yes, I am Team Bigfoot right here. So I'm on board with everything you're saying.
Well, good.
Okay, so you and Ronnie, you're traipsing around in the Appalachian Mountains, and
I wouldn't call it traipsing. Have you been to the Appalachian Mountains?
Well, I mean, I guess what would you call it? What would you call it?
I mean, I got to tell you, the Appalachian Mountains was as difficult as any African terrain and mountain, or even rainforest environment deep in the Amazon as I've ever experienced in the United States. It was tough. The heat was intense, followed by these cold temperature drops that, really left you sort of at risk for hypothermia at night. And then you've got this incredible, it was just like scaling a wall. These hills, I mean, they really took it out of you. So yeah, traipsing would have been hard there.
Okay, trudging, maybe trudging along.
I think trudging is good.
And then you come upon this massive tree structure and you discover what exactly? What do you find that then leads to this next step?
So Ronnie had very often talked about these tree structures, and I had never seen one. And so every so often I would see something and I'd say, "Is that what you mean by a tree structure?" And he'd say, "No, no, that's not it." And all of a sudden we're trudging through Kentucky and I see something in front of me that my light caught, and it was this massive structure that looked very intricate and purposefully built, and it was very large. And I knew right then and there that that's what he meant by a tree structure. And so I called him over. He looked at it. I could see it. I mean, his eyes widened up and he's like, "Oh my God, this is a huge tree structure." He was really excited. I started to look around the area for tracks, hair, anything that we could find. And I collected a soil sample that would then be able to be analyzed for eDNA, so environmental DNA.
And just to backtrack on this idea of a tree structure, I think a lot of people out there, maybe along with the popular tropes of Sasquatch we've come to associate, I think most people understand there's a noise, there's typically a very pungent smell, but there is this idea that a potential Sasquatch would build some type of structure, some type of shelter. Is that something that is typical amongst primates? Do other primates do that?
So other primates do, in fact, like orangutans, for example, will use natural resources available to them to build sort of a structure, perhaps from the rain, some kind of a shelter. But to me, I'm not sure how much this would serve up as a shelter. My understanding from Ronnie is that a lot of the accounts surrounding these tree structures is that they're actually used as markers or forms of communication, or even at one point he said almost like an infant playpen, which is something that we do see in the primate communities, where in order not to put their young at risk, many times primates will park their young and their infants in a spot, and that's slightly hidden so that they can go out and forage or hunt and not put them at risk.
And you collect this soil sample,
Mm-hmm.
and you send it off. If I recall, you send it off to the UCLA California Environmental DNA Program,
Correct.
and I believe it was a Dr. Ramos over there, or a project manager there. What did she find? What analyzes this eDNA sample? What happens?
So just so that you know, I collected several samples in Kentucky, and basically the motivation for that is that if there was an area that we suspected some sort of activity that was out of the ordinary, like a footprint or something that looked like something had traipsed in it, I would collect a soil sample. And of the 3 soil samples that we sent to the UCLA lab, this one came back with a very surprising read. And I got to be honest with you, it was shocking. I was not expecting this, and they were clearly not expecting this. And I think that they were in quite disbelief and said, this is an incredibly surprising find, and it's really raised an eyebrow over here, because as we all know, there are no non-human primates running around the woods in North America. So what we found was, and just to clarify, what eDNA does is living things give off DNA all the time. So we basically shed DNA and we leave it wherever we've been. So eDNA is basically a snapshot, or gives you a clear snapshot of anything that's been in that area. So not surprisingly, it picked up on human DNA, it picked up on bear DNA, deer DNA, hawk DNA. And the part that of course was surprising is, as she's sharing her screen and showing me the results, I see the genus Pan, which is the genus for chimpanzee. And I'm thinking, why is that on there? And she said, well, that's the surprising find that I wanted to talk to you about. We picked up not just on hundreds of reads, but thousands of reads of chimp DNA from that sample.
And it doesn't seem like these pan troglodyte chimpanzees, is that what they were? It doesn't seem like. Oh, go on.
Well, so there was one hit of pan troglodytes specifically, which is one species of chimp. There are several. The other reads did not bring it down to the species level. So for the moment, and especially because we're using eDNA, which is a little bit trickier to work with, it's been exposed to elements. There's some level of degradation due to sunlight and just the elements that it's under. The reads were really in the thousands to the chimp genus level, not the species level.
How would we know that this could not be it could not be human DNA out there? Because certainly there are, despite the trudging around in the Appalachians that would be required. Is this clear enough to dismiss that this could be connected to human behavior? Can you say that definitively?
To human behavior or human presence?
Human DNA sequences, human DNA.
So, I mean, we got thousands more hits of human DNA, which is quite distinguishable, of course, from chimp DNA. And the way that the sequences are run, it has to match by more than 85% with an identified, in this case, human DNA, chimp DNA, whatever. It's an enormous database that's able to match up and pick up on all of these reads. And in this case, it was more than an 85% match, because that's how they set it to chimp DNA. To be very clear, and I have said this several times in the stuff that I've put out and the press release, this definitely is a surprising and really interesting find, but it does require further investigation, not just in the field, but also in the lab. And I think that these need to be manually run, and they have to be closely looked at, because while it'd be really exciting to grab onto this and run with it, that was, as I said in the beginning, part of the reason that I wanted to do this is because I wanted it to be truly grounded in science. But she was very, like I said, surprised and confident. As she said, if it had just been hundreds of reads, I would not maybe even included it or even mentioned it. But the fact that it was thousands of reads makes it all the more convincing and compelling.
Can you put any kind of time frame on these DNA samples? Like, how long would they be viable out there in that wilderness?
Right. So the samples that are going to be most preserved, of course, are going to be ones that are found in caves that are very nicely protected from the elements. eDNA is used quite commonly in aquatic environments, because as animals shed DNA in the water, I mean, they're just kind of bounced around everywhere, and you're able to work with those quite well. As far as how long that's been out there, that would be a really difficult thing to assess. If you were not getting sufficient reads, you would know that there was high degradation of that sample, right? So the fact that we were getting these clear reads on humans and hawks and different species that are out there, it's difficult to say, how long had it been exposed in sunlight? How long had it been since these animals walked through there? Really difficult to say, but we also do know that eDNA is really a relatively new but also revolutionary tool in conservation biology, because it is able to quickly assess the biodiversity in an area, tell us what's there without ever having to see an animal either by sight or on a camera trap, nothing like that. And some of these studies have actually shown animals that haven't been around for thousands of years. So that DNA was clearly maintained for a very long time, but difficult to say on this one.
I suppose the question is, Doctor, if this search continues, and it will, a lot of people that dismiss the existence of Sasquatch, of a large bipedal primate out there roaming around North America, much less the rest of the world, because every culture has some sort of version of their Bigfoot. How could this large primate presumably remain undetected? And not just one, because it's not just one singular, hey,
Yeah.
I'm Bigfoot. How could a entire species or a tribe of these primates go undetected in North America alone?
Yeah, well, based, that's a very fair question. And based on the eyewitness accounts, right, which span from basically all over the country. And as you say, I mean, when you look at Native American folklore, it's incredible to me that each one of these groups have a different, language, and they all have a different name for Bigfoot, but their accounts are all very consistent in description. And so you know that there has to be more than one to have a sustainable population of anything. So, but we don't talk about big feet, right? So I think it's Bigfoots, right? But how does something that large hide is obviously something that most people ask, and I've obviously asked myself that question. But what I can relate it to is I have been several feet away from an entire group of gorillas, right, with silverbacks weighing, over 400 pounds. They're quite massive animals. And I've been a few feet away from them, no more than 3 to 5 feet. And they have remained hidden, so I didn't know that they were there for hours without making themselves visible. We see across the animal kingdom these incredible adaptations that animals have to camouflaging, either in physical ways or in behavioral ways, using stealth or different modes. There's talk about animals that go into cave systems. Primates do that as well. We just discovered a new population of lemurs living in caves that we never knew did that. Baboons will use caves quite often as well. So how do they remain hidden? It's a fascinating question, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that even a very large animal can do so if it wanted to. Like, the adaptations are certainly there, and if that's what's kept an animal, if you think about evolution and how that works, it's going to be, if that is something that has kept them alive for all of these centuries, then it's something that's just going to perpetuate, and they're going to get incredibly good at it.
Yeah, and I would even go so far. I'm not the scientist here, but I will say, as someone that spends a lot of time outdoors and hiking and whatnot, even something like a bear, you don't see the bear until the bear typically wants to be seen.
Mm-hmm. And
And
that's the true thing with the gorillas as well. You won't see them unless they want to be seen. And very often you smell them before you see them. And even when you smell them, you can't figure out, you're close, but you have no idea where they are. And it's kind of amazing how they're able to camouflage themselves, because they stand out in color in a forest, and yet they blend somehow right into the foliage.
yeah, and someone in the comments said the only thing that they may not be able to hide would be the smell. But I could say that unless you're looking and actively trying to associate a smell with a Sasquatch, you might dismiss it as just some decaying object out there.
Right. Bears have a very strong smell. Gorillas have a very strong, pungent smell, particularly the silverback. And that's not an unusual thing. I don't think they even try to mask that.
Well, we have a few minutes left, so I want to pepper you with a couple other questions. One of the things, first off, just side question, since there are so many different names for these Bigfoot creatures out there, what's your favorite name, label, term for it?
Oh, I've heard man of the forest.
That's elegant.
Actually, wild man of the forest. And I sort of love the idea of that.
Yeah.
So I like that one. What's yours?
I think, well, probably because of my Floridian roots, probably skunk ape, but I do have a fondness for wood booger.
I had not heard that one.
Yeah, so but there's so many out there. And one of the things that because even within just North America alone, it does seem that these sightings are accompanied by different characteristics and traits and shapes and colors. But one thing I want to kind of hone in on is levels of aggression, because we have heard of and aggressiveness associated with some of these creatures. Does that fit with primatology? Would that fit with, would a potential Sasquatch have aggressive traits? Would it even perhaps eat meat or be more of a predator rather than just this kindly Harry and the Hendersons character that's out there?
Right. So, there's no guesswork in science. So you'd have to take this solely from anecdotal stories that you hear from eyewitnesses. But if I look at the animal kingdom, specifically primates, chimpanzees are incredible hunters, and they actually coordinate their hunts. They're very strategic, and everyone has a very specific role. They're very planned out hunts. And so could this creature be a predator and a hunter? Sure. When you look at gorillas, you've got the Western lowland gorillas, and then you've got mountain gorillas. And while people would confuse the two, sort of visually, they look very similar to someone who doesn't know the subtle distinctions between the two. They're very different in characters. And I would say that mountain gorillas are much more passive. And while I wouldn't call Western lowland gorillas aggressive, I have been charged many, many times by Western lowland gorillas, whereas with the mountain gorillas, there seems to be more of a passive nature. And a lot of that has to do with an animal's environment and their ability to access food, and also their history, like whether they've been hunted for centuries or not. Western lowland gorillas are not trusting of humans, and rightly so, because they've been hunted for so long. So we see these differences in the primate world, and we definitely see all of these different variations with the color and the behavior and all of those things. That is mostly a result of the environment that they live in.
And there is this question, and I imagine you probably get asked this within the scientific community, and I get posed it for different reasons, but I kind of lean more towards the folklore and obviously journalistic side. But some people might say, Dr. Mehra, like, you are this accomplished scientist. What are you doing on a reality TV show, an unscripted show? Is this not taking away from the serious research that you could be doing, that you have done? And I think you know where I'm going there. I'm sure you've gotten it before. Can you just address that a little bit for anyone out there that might be asking that question?
Yeah, so I am a strong believer in science communication. It's one of the reasons that I took my role at Florida International University. And Bigfoot has been, quite honestly, a very surprising vehicle to talk about science with an audience that scientists don't typically get to talk to. So that's one reason why I thought that this was important to do. I call it doing using the bad powers of TV for good, right? So basically, yes, the show has to be entertaining for people to want to tune in, but that doesn't mean lessening the science or the stuff that we're actually doing out there. At least not for me. As I said, I took this on with the intention of treating it like I would any other expedition that I would be leading out in the field, tracking animals that are known, right? So, are there critics of my involvement in that? Well, sure. Do I honestly care? I mean, I'll put it bluntly, no, I don't, because I think it's really important that, listen, I get emails from young girls and young women who say, you've inspired me to want to go out and pursue a career in STEM. You've inspired me to spend more time in nature and go explore. Or people from all over who will write in and say, thanks for being out there and for taking on this search that so many scientists won't touch, right? Including scientists themselves have said that to me in private. Like, I think this subject matter is fascinating, and I would do it if I wouldn't get so criticized. I suppose that doesn't matter to me, because at the end of the day, if we are able to irrefutably prove and get the scientific community to accept that's, because we have the evidence, then that's a major discovery and a major role in understanding our own role in human evolution and in primate evolution. So, if we're out there and we're exploring and we come across something else and some other discovery, which happens all the time, just by the sake of being out there, then that's okay too. You don't always find what you're looking for, but you might find something else. So I'm a strong believer that exploration is worth it for the sake of exploration. And if we have the opportunity to put a real answer to this long asked question, then phenomenal.
And quite honestly, I would rather a group of researchers and scientists and even a TV show be out there searching and discovering, as opposed to someone that's actively hunting and seeking to shoot one of these amazing creatures. And that's my greatest concern, is that our discovery is going to come with a corpse, with a dead specimen. So
and that's honestly always a concern and a risk when I go out on other scientific expeditions, that you are habituating, for example, animals like gorillas to humans, and by doing so, you're having them trust people that they maybe shouldn't trust. So it's a cost benefit thing. Having humans around and employing trackers that used to hunt them, for example, where the gorillas become more valuable alive than dead, or you're bringing economic more wealth to an area that needs it. All of these things, you have to look at the balance. And quite frankly, for conservation, muddy boots and being present is actually a really good thing. So just making sure that orders are set in place for protection when you're working with an endangered animal is definitely important.
And finally, where can people find you to keep up with your adventures?
So I have a website, MireyaMeyer.com, and I'm on Instagram at Mireya Meyer, same handle for Twitter. And then if you want the Facebook, it's at Mireya Meyer TV.
All right, Dr. Mireya Meyer, we don't know if they found Bigfoot, but Expedition Bigfoot is currently streaming on Discovery Plus. This is season 2. The season finale is titled New Discoveries, and that features the newly found eDNA evidence. That premieres on Sunday, March 28th. And more.
Oh, yeah.
More. Okay.
And more.
All right, we'll see. Okay, now I've definitely, now we've got to all tune in for it. Dr. Meyer, you are excellent. I thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to let you go. Let's do this again soon.
Would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
And guys, thank you for joining. This was a lot of fun. And look, we have serious scientists out there researching these topics. And just because you might label it as paranormal, it just means that it's not currently defined by the scientific community, but we have great people out there looking into it. So if you like these paranormal live streams, thank you. Make your voices heard in the comments below. Also, I kindly ask you to give me a shout at Aaron Sagers on Instagram and Twitter. Season 4 of Paranormal Caught on Camera is currently airing, and you can also check out my Nightmerica True Crime and Paranormal podcast. So thank you all for joining, and stay spooky, my friends.